This is Coop's Comedy Corner. Buckle up because it's funny as Coop's Comedy Corner.
Welcome to Coop's Comedy Corner. I'm the host, Steve Cooper, and we have another great show this week. You know, this is a gentleman I've known for a long time, back in the old comedy cabaret days when we used to wear blazers and push our sleeves up. And he's written for Leno, Letterman, Tom Green. He's a comedian. He's a past Cooper Talk guest, and now he's on Coop's Comedy Corner. And it's Gabe Abelson. How you doing, Gabe?
Hey, good to see you, Steve. I've been traveling a lot. I've been flying a lot. Time zone changes. So excuse me for that. I'm doing quite well. And you and I do go way back to the 80s, I'm sure.
Late 80s, I would say. I started doing comedy in like 88.
Yep.
And I remember I worked at a few Scarpati gigs with you. Because you worked and you would headline, and Karen Loshbaugh, I think, would be feature, and I would host. And I remember those gigs like at Doylestown and King of Prussia, and he had so many rooms. Remember that? Like
so many rooms. Was it Karen Loshbaugh or Claudia Sherman?
I think both. I think I worked at Snow. I worked with her, Claudia Sherman.
I went out with both of them.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
At different periods of time. I'm not that guy. I didn't make it sound terrible.
They took your comedy class, you son of a bitch. They took your comedy
class. But yes, it's funny. The only time I think I ever wore a jacket on stage was for the Scarpati gigs when I was headlining. I was not a suit guy, but yeah, you always did comment on the blazers, which meant a lot to me, Steve.
Well, no, because I remember that. But you always do that. Solid act. But I want to talk about comedy. But last time I talked to you, you were a mentalist. Are you still doing that? No,
I am.
Tell me. Now that Kreskin died, you could be like the top mentalist.
So, well, the difference is Kreskin was not really, if you go by the book, was not really a mentalist. He does what we call mental magic. Like, for instance, he does card tricks. I don't use any cards in my act at all. I basically tell someone like the name of their fourth grade teacher, stuff like that. Kreskin didn't do pure mentalism like that, which is fine. I mean, he's unbelievable. I would be very happy to have had the career Kreskin had. But what I do is more persuasion, suggestion, influence-based stuff. And, and there is some thought reading and thought sending and so forth. But I really try very hard to distinguish what I do from magic. Because the difference is with magic, you go, how did he do that trick? That's unbelievable. Never seen anything like it. But with mentalism, when it's really done as pure mentalism, it's how could he know that? How could he know that person I haven't spoken to in 20 years? And to me, that's much more powerful. So I find it really, really fascinating stuff. And you're never done learning. There's hypnosis, persuasion, suggestion. Magic is part of it, but psychology is a huge part of it. So many things. So, yeah, I really enjoy it.
So how did you end up, because, as I said, we'll get into your writing, but, you wrote for Letterman, you wrote for Leno, you wrote for Tom Green. You've been a comedy writer your whole life. You've also performed, you've been a headliner, but you seem to be, you've gravitated towards comedy writing more, I think, because as you know, well, I think now you're back doing cruises, but it was a hard life. But now how do you go from being a comedy writer to a mentalist? Because it doesn't seem like, I can see if you went from being a magician to a comedy magician, but what was the transformation that made you start doing mentalism?
When I was a little kid, I played around with magic, but I wasn't really that interested in it. When I was writing for Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher 23 years ago, the executive producer, a big executive producer in LA, a guy named Kevin Hamburger, he said, I must have shown him something. He said, I do magic too. He said, in fact, my cousin is one of the best known magician/mentalists in the world. This is like 2002. And I was like, what's a mentalist? He said, well, you got to go see him. He's got his own show in the Duke and Duchess of Windsor Suite at the Waldorf Astoria, only 30 people at a time. It's like $250 for tickets. He said, but he's my cousin. We'll get you in, whatever. So I went with my wife and he did stuff that I had never seen. He used my wife in this one demonstration where she stood on one side of the stage. Another woman stood on the other side. He had them both close their eyes. He touched the other woman on the shoulder and he says to my wife, did you feel a touch? She says, yes. He said, where? She points to here. And he kept doing stuff like that. It was like, I have to learn how to do this. And so I did. So he said, you got to buy books on psychology, magic. He said, I'll get you started with a couple of books and videos to buy. And so now I have like 4,000 books and videos, and I have a number of mentors that teach me new stuff and new concepts that I will develop into routines. So yeah, it's something that's totally different than anything else I do. It was just something that, became a passion. Started as a hobby 20 something years ago, and then turned into a living.
Now, because I remember we talked before you got on there about being flappers in the Yoo-Hoo room. And I think that was my show. I used to book a show there where we were working together, and you went into the crowd and you did the mentalism stuff, and people were blown away. But when did you decide to start incorporating that into your comedy? Because you're also, you're a great joke writer. You have great stage presence. You're an impressionist. I mean, so when did you sit there and go, hey, you know what? I'm going to change it a little bit.
I think audiences, and I'm just thinking of this now, I hadn't pre-thought of this, but now that you brought this up, it's made me realize, I think to a degree, an audience, and probably other artists would probably disagree with me on this, to an extent, an audience determines what your career path is. In the sense that if you're doing stand-up for years, I can't believe the amount of people that tell me they've been doing stand-up for 10 years that don't have a single joke in their act. It just blows my mind. All over, now that everyone and their brother is doing stand-up, people, and you see it in the clubs, the writing is a lost art. In any case, I was always more of a writer than a performer. I was not one of these, I was not a Sam Kinison type on stage. I wasn't like riveting to listen to, just kind of a regular guy. I was always about the writing. And so I think what happened is I got to a certain point where I was, as you said, I was headlining, but I wasn't getting the Tonight Shows or the Lettermans as a stand-up. I didn't have that really specific persona and, go get them kind of thing. It was more about the writing, more about the technical aspect of writing. So I think at a certain point after 14, 15 years in my career, I was doing audience warm-up for Bill Maher in New York before I ever got a job in TV. And I said, hey, what if I have an idea for a joke, for a monologue joke? And Billy Martin, who was the head writer, who I'm sure you probably know from Stand Up too, he said, send it. We have a fax program. It's kind of a thankless job, but we look to our regular writers first, and Bill only does 6 jokes in the monologue. So I thought, what the hell, I'll try it. And the first day I tried it, half the monologue was mine. 3 out of the 6 jokes were mine. I thought, oh my God, this is a calling I didn't know I had. And then show business will humble you very quick. The next night I wrote twice as much stuff, got nothing on. Same thing the next night, nothing on. But then I got 2, then I got 1, then I got 3 again, and they put me on a retainer. And I realized very quickly, because then that thing ended, they moved out to LA, which ended up being, ironically, my first job after Letterman was Bill Maher, and which I would not have gotten if I didn't have my 5 years at Letterman. So, because they didn't want to hire me when I was submitting when I was faxing jokes and I was doing audience warm-up, because I'd never had a writing job in TV at that point. It's like getting your SAG card. It's that catch-22. You have to have a SAG job, but you have to have the card to get the job. So in any case, when I went over to Letterman, the same thing happened. Oh, it's a thankless job, but go ahead, Bill Sheff, who said, send me jokes. And then I got on a retainer there. And then one day, Sheff called me out of the blue. He was the only monologue writer on that show. It's the only late night show where there was one monologue writer, which was Sheff, and the rest were faxers. So I never thought I'd get a job there. But one day, Bill calls me, says, I'm leaving the show to write a book. Would you be interested in my job? And it's one of those, you remember where you were, what you were wearing, where you were standing. And it was a life-changing phone call, obviously. And I quit stand-up, and I realized very quickly that this was what I was. I got so much further, so much quicker doing late-night comedy writing than I ever got doing stand-up, that I realized, well, okay, so clearly I'm better at this than what I thought I wanted to do since I was 13 years old. So it was a very bitter pill. It was a bitter pill to swallow in a way, like, I'm not the George Carlin I wanted to be, but I can succeed in this other area beyond my wildest dreams. And then I did that. And then, of course, as you get into your 50s, the TV jobs just aren't there like they were anymore. They just aren't. Even if you're, a much bigger name in television than me. They're just not as frequent. I was just talking to a bunch of showrunners and executive producers about this. So that's when during this whole time, I had been playing around in mentalism as a hobby. And so I thought, well, the TV jobs aren't as frequent. Maybe I can go back on the road, but I'm going to need more time. And to write another new 45 minutes is going to take me years, or at least a couple of years. But I can put together 8 mind reading demonstrations and do that right away. And that's what I did. So what happened was, what I lacked in skill as a mentalist, I made up for in being able to be spontaneous on stage, which magicians and mentalists notoriously are not very good at. So that carried me until I actually had the chops to be a good mentalist. So now what I'm trying to do is really put them both together in a very seamless way, mentalism and stand-up. So that's my next thing to tackle.
Now, what got you into stand-up? Because you said earlier when you were 13, and, I think a lot of us, we saw, you talk to people who are older, you saw The Tonight Show. And I still remember, I always laugh. I bought George Carlin Toledo window box. Now, I had no idea what a Toledo window box was. I mean, he's sitting there with a marijuana plant on
the windowsill. I know, me too.
My parents had no idea. My parents were like suburban, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. They had no idea what window box was. And I was talking to someone about this. I was on a podcast the other night, and I was talking to the host, and I said, with Carlin, and I said with Cheech and Chong, because my brother listened to them, I didn't get the material half the time. I just liked their voice inflections and how they said stuff. And I was like, as a young kid, jumbo shrimp, shit like that.
Yeah.
But so what was your introduction to comedy? Because you said you started when you were 13.
It's
you wanted to
so
do it.
similar, with an added wrinkle that will really surprise you, I think. So when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I lived in this landscape development in New York City, right before you get to Harlem, by Columbia University. And there are benches. It's like a little park almost. And there was a very elderly lady named Mary Carlin who used to sit down there and tell me stories about her son. This is long before I got into comedy. It's before I had my first comedy album. She told me stories about her son, George, and how he used to like to dress up as Mae West and do impressions of Mae West, come up and see me sometime, and Jimmy Cagney and all this. And so then when I was about 14 or 15, I saw an album in the store when I had just started buying record albums myself. I was able to get an allowance by then. And there was an album called Class Clown by George Carlin. I open up the album and it's my block. And now I put together Mary Carlin, her son's name is George. This guy's a comedy. Oh, that's my block. Holy shit, this guy is her son. So the next day I asked her, George Carlin, your son? Yes. So she passed away soon after that. And so in the interim, in all the years I was doing stand-up, and you know this, I'd worked with Brenner. He used to work all those Philly clubs, and he worked the Rascals clubs in Jersey. I'd worked with Robert Klein. I opened for him at Mount Airy Lodge. And I'd worked with all of Carlin's. I never worked with Pryor, but he was before my time. But I worked with a lot of Carlin's contemporaries, but I never worked with George. He was in LA. I never met him. And so years and years after this, I was already, I think, probably 32 or 33. I was doing Caroline's Comedy Hour for A&E. And the executive producer had just done a show with George Carlin. I said, in all the years I've been doing this, I've never written a letter to a star ever. I've never written a fan letter, but I would like to write to George just to tell him that he was my inspiration for getting into comedy. And before him, it was his mother, that I knew his mother. And she said, well, I'll give you a post office box where you can write to him. So I wrote a letter to him, and I put stuff in the letter, because I'm sure he gets tons of fan mail that only someone that knew his mother would know. About the neighborhood, stuff about the neighborhood I put in, stuff that she told me, stories about him as a kid that I put in the letter. And I put at the end my name, my number and address and everything, and just kind of forgot about it. And I did forget about it. I never heard back. But a couple of months later, my wife comes running into my office going, Gabe, George Carlin's on the phone. I'm like, oh, fuck. So I talked to him, and we were on the phone for 2 hours talking about places in the neighborhood where we still go, friends we had in common that still lived in the neighborhood. And it was so exciting. And it came full circle when he finally appeared on Letterman around 2000. It was one of the only 2 times, the other time was Don Rickles, where I went up to a star's dressing room to introduce myself. And it was great. It had come full circle. I said, you're the guy, you're the reason I'm doing this. But it's so funny you mentioned that about his album, because I remember getting getting AM, FM, not understanding half of it, but especially like the David Fry albums. I didn't understand any of that. And before that, Tom Lehrer, probably too old for you. When I was a kid, my parents had Tom Lehrer albums, and I used to know all the songs and laugh, and I had no idea what he was really saying, but it sounded funny. Just what you said, it sounded
That's like with Cheech and Chong, because I interviewed Tommy Chong for Cooper Talk, and I was like, the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to tell you, my brother used to listen to the White Album, and of course, Tommy, we did recorded for an hour and 45 minutes, and he smoked a joint, and I was just like, it was just amazing. I'm like going the same thing. I'm like, but that was, earache my eye. How'd you like a butt ache? And then Cheech and Chong, I didn't know what that. I didn't get it, but it was the same thing. It was something that it struck a chord with us. So you want to do comedy, and so now you grew up in New York. Now, do you go to college or do you go to comedy? What do you do? What's your plan?
I went to. You couldn't major in comedy back then. Now you can at some schools. So I majored in drama. I got to study with arguably the greatest acting coach of the last century. I went to NYU. They had just started a program in 1976 where you could choose a professional acting studio, Stella Adlerley, Strasberg, Circle in the Square, or Experimental Theater Wing, and get a professional studio training at the same time you were getting your bachelor's. So that's what I did. I chose Strasberg. I got to study with Lee Strasberg for 4 years, which was insane. And I did, I did it. I don't call it acting, but I did a ton of commercials when I graduated. As I was building my stand-up career, I was doing a lot of commercials and vocal sound-alike, because I used to do about 150 impressions. So I used to do a lot of sound-alike radio ads. Yeah. Do you
remember? I want to get more to your comment, but do you remember an impression you used to part of your bit of your act? And I remember, I think I was talking about this years ago, and it still sticks in my head with Joe Matarese, and because Joe did impressions too.
Oh my God, Dustin Hoffman was insane.
But you did. It was Paul Reiser, Jerry Seinfeld, and Richard Lewis saying "But hey." Do you remember that? You probably don't remember that. But
I do remember that there's, and I didn't write this, by the way. I might have done the 3. I don't even remember that. There's somebody once did the difference between Jerry Seinfeld and Paul Reiser is Seinfeld is, who are these people? And Reiser is, who are these people? It was one of the two. And I don't remember what the Richard Lewis was, but I know Richard Lewis had an issue with Reiser, which is ridiculous. He thought Reiser was too much like copied him. I think Paul is totally his own man. I don't buy that for a second. God rest his soul, Richard, incredibly funny guy. But I think Paul is absolutely legitimately his own man, his own comic. I used to love watching Paul Reiser work. Yeah.
Now, you're in Manhattan. What are your early clubs when you start really cutting your teeth because you're working on your stand-up? You know what I do. Were you a catch guy? Were you a strip guy? Were you a Dangerfields guy? An improv guy?
I was 100% a comic strip guy. What happened was I graduated college in 1980. Right after the summer, I went to Europe for the summer. Right after the summer, I auditioned at the Strip, and I'm very proud to say got in on my first audition. I wish I could remember. Oh yeah, it was Richie who auditioned me, Richie Tenkin, and I passed. And the other first club of mine was the Comedy Cellar. You got to be really in stand-up a long time to remember this, because it was before it was the Comedy Cellar. It was called the West Coast Comedy Club, and it was on, I believe, 79th and Central Park West, which is a really weird place to have a comedy club because it's all residential. But it was underground, in part of a restaurant, like a room that was separate from the restaurant. And I love that room. But that must have been 80 or 81. I think by 82 or 83, they were already in the Village as the Comedy Cellar. So that was one of my first clubs. So I would say West Coast and Comic Strip were my 2 clubs. And you want to know what's funny is I had Well, I was still living at home then. I had my mother's car, a 64 Plymouth Valiant. And no comics that lived in Manhattan had a car. It just was impossible. But my mother had a garage under the building, and she was very poor. We just happened to have that. So I would drive to the comic strip, and I used to drive Seinfeld home very often because he didn't have a car. The irony, which, he's got 1,000 of them now. And I used to drive him home every night. I was the wealthy guy with the 64 Valiant. It's pretty funny in retrospect.
Who were some of those guys you were hanging out with then back then? Because I'm trying, were you in the same class as Seinfeld, or was Jerry before?
No, I came after. I was sort of the generation right after that. Seinfeld came along with Larry Miller and Paul Reiser and Hiram Caston and all of those people. I came along after that. They were like late 70s. I started in 80. So I started, I think, the same day as Steve Scrovan, who became a very, very successful TV writer. Raymond and Seinfeld, both the two most successful, Raymond and Seinfeld. I started with Scrovan. Who else? The people I can tell you.
Ober?
Yeah, Ken Ober. Ken Ober, Mike Rowe. The guys that I saw, I can tell you who I saw every night at the strip were people like Barry Berry. That was sort of the tail end of when Seinfeld was hanging out there. He was gone soon after. Reiser, same thing. Rita Rudner, Ronnie Shakes, Dennis Wolfberg every night, Joe Bolster every night. These were people I saw every night of my life for, about 15 years. JJ Ramirez, Scott Blakeman, DF Sweedler. These were strip acts. Yeah.
So you work in New York. When do you start getting those Scarpati gigs? When do you start branching out? Was that a little into it? Because we always knew if you were a Philly act, it was hard to become a headliner because they always say you have to go out on the road to come back.
They always see you that same way. Correct.
But for New York acts, there'd be like really some strong headliners. The New Yorker stars, but the features would usually suck. And they were only in because they either knew the headliner and they had a car, or they sat there and they had that New York title. They're a regular at Caroline's or regular, which anyone can say they're a regular. They might go on once every 3 weeks, but
exactly. So then that's a regular, yeah.
So when did you start? How long were you into the business till you started headlining?
I think I started headlining for Andy in 85 with my then girlfriend Claudia Sherman opening for me. So 85 or 86. So 5 or 6 years into it, I was headlining. And I'll be honest, I think I was a much better comic 13, 14 years into my career than now after 40 years. Because back then I was doing 3-4 sets a night, 7 nights a week. Now I'm on stage maybe once a month, twice a month. It's not the same. It's like, I don't care how good a professional baseball player you are. If you're not out there taking batting practice every day, you're just not going to be, your average is going to plummet.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you started writing, you started doing the email faxing into Bill Maher. Was that your actual first writing gig? For paid?
My very first writing gig. I think I had sold a couple jokes to Rodney back in the 80s. Yeah, that was I sold a couple jokes to a few comics back in the 80s. To Yakov Smirnov too. I think I sold a couple jokes. So, but it was my first television writing job. Yes, was submitting to Maher.
So what was your path though to Letterman? I mean, I know you said Bill Sheff, called you, but that wasn't just like it happened overnight. Did you have a staff job in between there, or what was your path from faxing with Letterman to just getting the Letterman job? I mean, because it's like, holy shit, that's a streak of luck. Like that's unheard of.
If left to my own devices, it would probably never have happened. I'm unfortunately lazy by nature. So what happened was, I'm doing the opening for Maher. I see the monologue. I go, I think I can write this kind of joke. Why it never occurred to me in the 15 years prior that I'd been doing stand-up, I don't know. But I wrote the joke, loved the process, got the jokes on, so I continued. Then when they moved out to LA, I happened to be doing a one-nighter working at a church with Adrienne Tolsch, who, if you remember, was Bill Sheft's wife. Now unfortunately, she passed on. And I happen to have my writing samples with me from Politically Incorrect. And I figured, you know what? Let me show them to Adrienne. She's a veteran. Nobody funnier. Maybe she'll think these are funny enough to send to Bill. And I said, what do you think? I showed them to her. She said, these are great. I said, what do you think? Should I send them to Bill? She said, well, I don't know what he'll say, but you should definitely send them to him. Yeah, these are good. So I sent them to Chef. He said, these are really good. He said, because I, like him, I had about 13 faxers, and you can't just approve every comic who wants to send jokes. They have to know how to write late night monologue. So, and you have to keep it manageable, because I have to read all those jokes and tweak the ones that I think Dave will want. And so I would put together about 50 out of the 300 plus about 20 of my own, and then give them to him. So Chef said, yeah, send me jokes tomorrow. Try to write them in Dave's voice. Little did I know I would never stop writing in Dave's voice. That's the voice that's my own. For some reason, he's in my head. So everything went well there. And again, any other television writer or somebody with more ambition would have said, hey, Chef is the only writer at Letterman. There's not going to be any room there. Let me try to get a packet to Conan, to Leno. I didn't do that. I was happy making my $500 or $600 a week, whatever it was, on retainer, because the money had already gone down on stand-up. We're talking about the mid-90s now. And just doing that, and just doing my my writing in the morning for that, and doing my stand-up at night. Out of nowhere, it wasn't by my hand. Bill Chef called me and said, I'm leaving the show to write a book. There's 5 guys on retainer. You'll be one of them. He said, I think you have a good chance, a really good chance. So I'm going to set you up with an interview. And, I didn't get nervous around stars at that point. I'd been doing it so long. I'd worked with so many stars, but I did get nervous with David Letterman. I really wanted the job, and Letterman was also like my hero, So, so I went for the job, and before I went in there, as an interesting story, actually, this is a really interesting story, I think. So Chef said to me, he said, look, he said, the one best piece of advice I can give you is Dave's going to throw you off your game. He's going to try to. He said, he'll say something out of nowhere, like, do you like red meat? He said, he's just going to do that to see how you roll with the punches. And, because I was the only writer really that he had a lot of FaceTime with every day. Like Chef, the monologue was so important to Dave. He spent an hour with me in the dressing room going over the jokes like he did with Bill. He didn't have FaceTime with the other writers. So he needed to know this was somebody that he could, spend time with, whatever. So Chef warned me that. So I made a mental note. Okay, get ready to roll with a curveball. He never asked me that. The very first thing he said to me, do you know Mitch Walters and Uncle Dirty? And I said, do I know Mitch Walters and Uncle Dirty? And I started telling him stories about Dirty, working the road with Dirty and working the road with Mitch Walters. And Letterman was laughing. He said, I lived with Mitch Walters and I think it was Gary Mulder in the apartment over the Comedy Store in the 70s. He said he was into everything that I wasn't. Hookers, gambling, and cocaine. And he said, Dave didn't do any of that. And he said, but I always got a big kick out of him. I always thought he was the funniest guy. Anyway, the interview went really well. And Dave, and I got the gig. And I think if I had to say one thing that put me over the top, I think it was the fact that I was a comic and all the other guys that interviewed, they were all great writers. We were all writing around the same level, but I was the only stand-up. And considering that Bill Shepp was a stand-up, and the first thing that Dave does is call you over to the desk to ask, how'd it go? What'd you think of the crowd? I think he probably wanted to stand up. But the other thing that was interesting was I thought, well, that's kind of cool. He never tried to throw me off my game. And years later, I told my buddy Tom Green this story. And Tom, who's one of the brightest people I've ever known, I think other than Letterman, maybe the smartest man in television I've ever met. And Tom said to me, he said, you do realize that the Mitch Walters Uncle Dirty question was the red meat question. And that's why you got the job. I was like, son of a gun. You're right. You're absolutely right. Because if you're not a comic, you have no idea who Uncle Dirty and Mitch Walters are. So that was the red meat
So
question.
what is it? I worked with Mitchell Walters at the comic strip in Fort Lauderdale.
So did I. That's where I worked with him. If you worked the strip in Lauderdale, you have to work with Mitch.
Yeah, I'm in the bathroom. Now my nose is running. I went, and Mitchell Walters he's headlining, doesn't talk to me all week. There's like, I'm one of the 2 features. And he says,
now he's talking to you.
Yeah. Cooper, you have cocaine you're not sharing? And I'm like, dude, and it's like, I'm thinking, Mitchell, it's Fort Lauderdale. The doorman, if he asked, would give you an 8-ball. It's like, it wasn't hard to find, but I was just blowing my nose. And he's like,
right.
But he was funny, man. He was a funny fucking guy.
Oh my God, was he funny? And in fact, they had overbooked that week. It was me, Mitch Walters, Dom Irera, Dennis Wolfberg, Jackie Martling. It was like a cavalcade of headliners the week I was there. It was insane. And so over the course of the week, Mitch had borrowed money from each of us, thinking that we would not discuss this amongst ourselves, like he could put one over on us. So one day we're all at the condo sitting there watching TV. There's like 7 or 8 of us. And Dom, you know what a ball buster Dom can be. And Dom pulls out a roll of hundreds like this. And he goes, Mitch, could you just keep this safe for me? Hold on. I don't have like any pockets anywhere to keep it safe. And you could just see Mitch sweating, like he wanted to take it, but he couldn't take it. And we're all sitting there just laughing our asses off. It was, those days were so much fun.
Oh, they were crazy. Now, after Letterman, what do you do after Letterman? Why'd you leave Letterman?
After Letterman, say again?
Why did you leave Letterman?
Well, what happened was, Bill left the show to write a book. And then he wrote a second book. And then he came back to the show. And, I absolutely no problem with that. I mean, every job I had in TV after came because of Letterman. And in fact, 5 years is a lifetime at Letterman. There are people whose name you would know, famous people who were actors and then went on, who were writers and then went on to become writers and actors that are like household names that I saw there for 6 weeks or 12 weeks, 9 weeks, or I'm sorry, you work in 13-week contracts, 13 weeks or 26 weeks and then gone. So many people at all these shows, they're like one cycle, then gone. Because it's not just about your work, it's about personalities, politics. And so I feel blessed to have been there 5 years. And Chef said to me when I left, and he was right, he said, now that you have this credit for 5 years, he said, you're not going to have any problem getting work in TV. And he was right. And so I feel like I owe my career to Bill. And so what happened was after that, I had 2 little kids at that time. So I did a couple of pilots for MTV that I was head writer on. And then I got an offer from Bill Maher. So I came out to LA, but Bill Maher had made some comments. This was shortly after 9/11 that did not go down well. And so the show was sort of in limbo. We didn't know if we'd get picked up. And sure enough, they didn't get picked up after that cycle. So I didn't move my family out yet. Then I created a show, ironically, with the former producer of Letterman, Robert Morty, called Mind of Mencia. I created that show with Morty. And then little did I know that show would last 6 seasons. I just worked on the pilot. But while we were waiting to see if the pilot would get picked up, which it did, I got an offer from The Tonight Show. And what was I going to do? Stay with Mencia, that was at that time, we didn't know if it was going to go, or go with The Tonight. Well, I had to take The Tonight Show gig. So that's how I got to Jay. And in between, there was Tom Green, too, in between there.
Well, now, when you wrote for Jay, what was the difference between writing monologue for Letterman? Were you a monologue writer for Jay, or were you a sketch writer
for Jay? I wrote sketches, commercial parodies. It was amazing. I wrote, and I teach this in my class. I've been teaching late night writing for about 20 years now. And, there are people that teach it that should not be teaching it unless, like I talked about the political and social aspect of it, unless you've been on a show in that, and not just any talk show, a nighttime talk show, you can't teach everything that you need to be teaching to prepare people. So, I mean, if anyone your viewers wants to reach out, they can reach out on Facebook or Instagram. Gabe Abelson, Abelson. But yes. So your question was
not Leno. The difference in writing with Leno and Letterman.
Tremendous difference. So with Leno, with Dave, I was just writing jokes. That's all I had time for. His monologue was, one guy. It was a lot of pressure. With Leno, I wrote, parodies, like commercial parodies. I remember the first commercial parody. Leno said, "Yeah, this is great. Let's do it." I didn't know what to do, so I went to the head writer. He said, "Well, first you got to meet with the set design. Tell them what you want," because took place in the kitchen. It was a fake commercial for like a George Foreman grill called the Holy Grill. It imprints your favorite sandwiches with religious figures so you can sell them for thousands on eBay. Okay, so so I said to the set guys, "I need something that looks like a kitchen." And the guy looks at me like an idiot. He says, "You mean a kitchen?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You want 2 wall, 4 wall, 3 wall?" I didn't know what. I said, "Give me 3 walls." I had no idea what I was asking for. But then I went to a casting and I picked the actress. I went to wardrobe. I picked her wardrobe. Then I told the set designers exactly what I want. I want a window here. I want an island in the kitchen. I'm on a white blank sound stage, nothing in the room. I come down 3 hours later. There's a kitchen I would die for with a sub-zero fridge and a stove and an island in the middle. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And now suddenly I've gone from being a joke writer to Spielberg. Because here I am making a little mini movie and I direct the shoot. And afterward, they give me the card. I go to the to edit bay and I edit the tape with the guy. I mean, he's doing the editing, but I'm telling him I want this, I don't want that, whatever. Cut here, cut there. So it was an incredible experience of going from being a joke writer at that point for 25 years to now suddenly being really also a joke writer, but a filmmaker as well. Writing my own films, my own scripts. It was so exciting.
So when you were doing that, though, did you miss the straight on monologue writing? I mean, when you're sitting there, I mean, it all sounds great, being your little mini Spielberg and things like that. But did you miss the monologue? Because as you said, that was what you were doing. That's like your baby,
the monologue comes easiest to me, but I enjoy that more because it's an entire production that's all at your hand. A joke is a line, somebody else is going to tell it, whatever, but here, that's fine. It's just, it's just a feeling of accomplishment that I don't get from, if I write a great joke, it feels like an accomplishment, a great joke, but not like this. Not like when you see an idea, that's an entire scene and it comes together like that. And you're putting all the parts together, the casting, the set, the design. It's really, I would be fine just doing that. In fact, when I got Letterman, people would say to me, "Doesn't it bother you that you're not telling your jokes anymore, that it's Letterman out there getting all the credit?" I was like, "What, are you kidding me? When I do it in a club, 200 people hear it. When he does it, millions of people hear it. Plus, it's David Letterman doing my jokes. You want to talk about a positive affirmation? I mean, it doesn't get better than that." So no, I don't mind not being the one out there at all. Now, I do. There are certain comics that are, you look at a guy like Jay, at his age, he's still pounding the pavement doing stand-up. That would not be me. If I had that, kind of money, and I was that, well, look, I've already basically, cut way down on it. I still do it with the right gigs, but I'm not driven to be on stage the way I was in my 20s and 30s, where I just had to be up there.
Okay, so earlier you mentioned Tom Green being one of the smartest guys in television. And now I know when I left, you were working with Tom, but how did your relationship start with Tom and what has made it continue?
Okay, great question. You ask great questions, by the way. I was head writer on his second MTV show, New Tom Green Show. We became really close friends. The way it happened was I was already working. This was the job I had right after Bill Maher. It was Late Show with Craig Kilborn on CBS, which was produced by Letterman. So I think I also got that job because maybe Letterman felt a little bad that I was, gone now, that Bill had come back. So I had gone. So I got hired for that show. And that show was CBS. So I was full pension, health, great money. William Morris, who I was with at the time, called me up, said, you have an opportunity to be a head writer in a new Tom Green show. Now, MTV was non-union. I said, yeah, but I'm not getting pension, not getting health. They said, just take the meeting. So I took the meeting with Tom, and within 20 minutes, I knew I had to work with this guy. It was going to be more money, but not enough to make not having pension and health worth it. You know what I mean? That's very valuable. But I wanted to, I was not really enjoying where I was tremendously. And so, I just loved what I heard from Tom. He told me he'd spent the last 5 years at the Museum of Broadcasting, watching old Steve Allen, Jack Parr Tonight shows. And that's what he wanted to do. I was like, I'm down for that. So I left CBS and I joined up with Tom. And over the years, he's now managed by Rory Rosegarden, who, as you know, is Ray Romano's manager. And Rory's just the best. And never have I seen him take on someone Tom's age. So that shows you he really believes in Tom. And sure enough, Rory got him a 3-show deal. Do you know that Tom has 3 shows on Amazon Prime right now? 3 at the same time. He's got a stand-up special that I wrote and produced with him. He's got another one called I Bought a Mule, which is about leaving LA and buying this 150-acre farm in Canada. It's a series. You should really check it out. I stayed at his farm last year. It's unbelievable. Really beautiful in the middle of nowhere in Canada. And another one that's the history of the Tom Green Show. And that one you have to watch, because Tom moved the set from his talk show into his living room and actually built bleachers in his living room and had an actual talk show set. And this is typical Tom Green. 2007, we have 9 HD cameras. This is before people were doing podcasts. We're doing an HD talk show, on-camera talk show in 2007 from his living room. And so we had Rogan on as a guest, and this is in the show. You should watch it if you have Amazon Prime. And at one point, Rogan's looking around. He goes, this is unbelievable, Tom. This is it. Right here, what you've done, this is the future. There's no network to answer to, no suits to answer to. You do it on your own terms. This is the future, and you can see the wheels turning. So then they cut to Joe now going, I would not do what I'm doing without Tom Green, without that appearance on that show. So I was there that night, when the whole thing sort of came together for Joe as #1 podcast. I mean, so it was, and this is true with Tom with a lot of things. And I think sometimes maybe it's a little frustrating because his mind is always working. So like the stuff that he did in the early 90s, the pranks on his parents, Jackass did all of that 10 years later. And there's even a video on YouTube, what came first, Tom Green or Jackass? And if you watch it, you'll be shocked because they literally stole the props, the camera angles. I mean, some of the stuff, Tom never did the self-mutilation stuff that Jackass did. He just did the practical jokes on his parents. They were harmless. But the practical jokes that Jackass does, I mean, you can see them do the exact same thing. So he was a real influence on them. So what happens is Tom does something, gets bored, moves on to something else, then somebody else comes along like Joe Rogan or the Jackass guys. They make hundreds of millions of dollars. And Tom was like, shit, I should have stuck it with it. But he can't because he's always 10 steps ahead of everybody else. He's a brilliant man.
Now, how many projects have you worked with him on?
Oh, my God. I must have worked on at least 15 projects with Tom by now. Yeah.
And what is your favorite? What is one of your favorites?
Definitely the Tom Green Show. Definitely the first one. And I would say the second one is probably, I think it was called Tom Green Live for Access TV. Because it was patterned after the old Tom Snyder show or Charlie Rose. It's just Tom and one guest. We had Dan Rather on, him and Dan Rather doing whiskey shots. It was great. But it was a serious interview. But I love that one-on-one format where they're not there to plug something. It's just pure. You really get to know the person.
So through the years, how has your writing style changed? I know you write a lot of stuff on, with all the political climate, and you write a lot of stuff you put it on Instagram, which I can never figure out how people shape it for Instagram. Like I screenshotted one of my Facebook jokes and I tried to.
I'll send you
And it comes up.
No, there's a meme generator site, and you make the meme there, and they even have a thing that says for Instagram, so it will size it for you. For
Because I
Instagram,
always sit there and go, it's all born out of proportion. But
I'll
so
send it to you.
So how has your joke writing, like when you sit down, okay, let's say like you're posting a joke on Instagram. Like me, I post stupid jokes on Twitter and Facebook, and they just pop in my head. And sometimes I do the thing about the stupid restaurant with the name connect actor, but then I'll think about them. I put thought into it. But for me, I never sit down and write. Even now that I'm doing stand up more, I mean, I do it.
It's very hard to. I don't either. When something hits me, I put it in my voice.
I mean, for me now, my setup, I go on and people are like, man, I did a completely like new 10 minutes a few weeks ago. I just had formulated in my head. And I think because now that we've done it, we have that, even though we're not up every night, like you said earlier, we still have that confidence. We know we've been on stage and there's a good chance we're not going to eat shit. And if you are, you can pull old tricks out of your hats. Even if it's a joke from 25 years ago, you go,
yep.
And if it's a child's old, I'll do this. And they'll understand an Abe Vigoda reference.
That's right.
They all laugh. But for you, how has your joke writing has it changed over the years, or do you still, or were you the guy who would sit down? I mean, for Letterman, you had to sit down and write. But now, do you watch the news and write something out, or do you just let stuff pop into your head?
Well, I think I've consciously made an effort to write stuff that's more personal because all the years I was pretty much an observational comic. And I think, unless you're Jerry Seinfeld or really one of the greats, it's very hard to carve a place for yourself without them really getting to know who you are on a personal level. So I've made a habit, and I'm not good at that. I'm not comfortable with turning my insides out. Some people are great at it, like Sam Kinison, whatever. I'm not great at that. It's hard for me. So it's a challenge. So in that sense, my writing has changed that way. I try to be more get into more personal stuff. And I also think it's become more concise. My jokes have become more concise purely through writing monologue because it has to be more concise than stand-up. One extra word, the choice of an and or an or can make a difference between a joke bombing or killing. Because when you write a monologue joke, half of it, which is you in the delivery, is taken out. So that joke has to be twice as strong as a stand-up joke because it's going to be read. So it's got to jump off the page. If you think about our stand-up acts, a lot of that stuff, if it's written on paper, is not going to be that funny. Half of it is how you deliver it. But you don't have that option when you're sending in a joke. So the joke itself has to be just gangbusters. It's got to kill right off the page. That's much harder. That's when you have to write. So when I sit down to write, it's only with monologue, never with stand-up.
So to the career of a comic, an actor, a writer, it's up and down. It's up and down. I think I talked to you in LA, I think it was right before I left. I think we were both very frustrated with the business. I think you were actually about to go do a cruise in like Hong Kong or something like that. Or I think you had booked some cruise to do your mentalist stuff and comedy. Did you ever do that? I remember you brought something up. You had to have to have tell me you had to have 2 hours of material or something like that.
I did a resort in Hawaii where I did 2 shows. One was mentalism and the other was comedy. Yeah, that was, yeah. But I've been back there a couple times. Yeah.
But I think, you go through a frustration. The business is frustrating. So what keeps you in the game? You sit there. I mean, it's like, I know it's, of course, as you get older, and we've been doing this all times, it's not like you're gonna sit there and go get a job as a human resource manager. What is it that what keeps you in the game? Because it is, as you said, you wrote for Letterman, then you wrote for Letterman, you write, and things happen like Letterman, Bill, it was a weird circumstance. Bill Schiff came back. But it's hard, that's a rejection, even though it's the reason. We always, as a performer, go, I must not have been good enough. Even though you were, it's just that this guy was Letterman's buddy. He came back. It's like anything. If you work as a salesman and the owner's son graduates college, he's going to take your job. So what keeps you in the game? Because
one of the things that keeps me in the game is I'm mostly doing mentalism now. I do a lot of corporate entertaining, which is well paid. And it's new to me. It's almost like, stand-up is, forget it, 45 years. Mentalism on stage is new enough. I mean, it's not that new. 10 years is new. 15 years is new. But there's always new stuff coming out, new things to learn that people have figured out. And a lot of memorization involved. So that keeps me engaged as a performer. And the most of what I do, 95% of my work now is as a mentalist.
Now, do you get the same high off a mentalist as when you killed a crowd for 45 minutes? Is it a different feeling? Because there's that, man, when you're destroying and people are clapping, and it's the joke.
There's nothing like that feeling. I mean, that's a different feeling. And in fact, it's another great question, Coop, because it took me a while to get used to it. A magician does a trick, they get wild applause, woo, or whatever, big reaction. When you do a mentalism effect, it's so impossible. When you tell someone, you're thinking of your fourth grade teacher, Mr. Green. Yes. And you're thinking of your first pet. It was a cat. It was named Nibbles. Yes. It's shock and awe. And people have said, why don't you combine your stand-up while you're reading a mind? I say you can't, because they're opposite reactions that you're going for. With stand-up, people have to be there at their most vulnerable to laugh. That's why women will usually laugh harder than guys, because you have to to a certain extent, let go of your machismo, your masculinity, and be vulnerable to laugh. It's a whole psychological thing. I mean, I've studied this a lot too as a mentalist. Whereas with mentalism, the object is shock and awe. You're not going to get that woo crazy with a magic trick, because people are just sitting in stunned silence. They don't know what to think. And then usually a few seconds later, then they start applauding, but mostly it's stunned silence. You have to get used to that, because with mentalism, I can count the amount of times in 45 years that I've gotten a standing ovation doing stand-up, probably count on one hand, sadly. Whereas with mentalism, I'd say 85% of the time the audience stands when I'm done.
Now what happens, and it has to happen, just like a joke bombs, if you get something wrong? What happens then? Like when you say, hey, you have a cat named Spunky that died when it was 8. It was a tabby. And someone goes, no. What do you?
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I'll tell you why I love it. If a magician does a trick and the trick fails, he's failed. I would be embarrassed. It's a failure. Nobody is expecting you, Coop. You would not be expecting me to tell you what your fourth grade teacher is. So if I don't get it right, you're like, yeah, it's what I thought. You can't really read a mind. Then I read the next person's mind. You're going, holy fuck, it just wasn't coming in clear. And by the way, to a certain extent, even that phrase is not coming in clear is true to a certain extent. Sometimes I'll get a couple of letters, but not the whole name. To me, what it does, it adds credibility. As long as it's not my last demonstration. If my last demonstration fails, I'm going to do another one after that, because I don't want to get off on something that doesn't work. But if it happens in the middle once or twice, awesome. Gives it more credibility.
Okay. Well, I got one final question for you, Gabe.
Sure.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
You too, man.
Looking back on your career, what are a few things you're very proud about? And it can be personal, it can be professional. What are some things that make you proud because you've survived? You've been writing, you've been doing this, and now you reinvented yourself somewhat. You're with the mentalism, and sure, Tom Green, you still work with him, but you roll with the punches. And I think that's more comics that do that. Comics roll with the punches because we have a different mindset. I think we have a different toolbox. We can write, we can perform. It shows comics can always act. We're used to just having us, so you can really have the time. So, but looking back, some personal and professional things you're very proud of.
I mean, personally, excuse me, there's nothing I could be more proud of. I mean, it's so schlocky, but it's absolutely true, than my kids. I was a problem kid. My ex-wife, we laugh about this a lot. We were both very difficult for our parents, difficult kids. Our kids were the best. No drugs, no alcohol, no getting in trouble. I mean, and my daughter's now in law school. She's been an actress her whole life, decided to go to law school, graduated top of her class, won the moot court. She's just, my father's whole family, they're all intellectuals. They're all professors, or were. They're all passed on now. That gene skipped my generation, but my daughter, and my son have it. My son is doing new media stuff. He's a channel manager for a production company for their YouTube channel. So the kids are doing great, and that's my biggest pride in my personal life, for sure, without any doubt. My professional life, yes. I mean, getting Letterman and staying there for 5 years and the 5 Emmy nominations, definitely a high point for me. The work that I've done, I think I'm most proud of the work I did on the new Tom Green show. It's so different, so out of the box. Really, really happy and proud of that work. And yeah, I think I'm to be in my 50s and then change direction completely and I can't say master, because you never master mentalism. It's like stand up. You can never master stand up, really. I mean, you could say that, yeah, Richard Pryor has mastered stand-up comedy. Carlin has mastered it, but they would probably say they haven't mastered it. Like a musician would probably say you got to pick the best guitarist in the world. Jimmy Page would probably say you never finish learning. So it's kind of like that. But I would say the reinvention, the landing of Letterman, the becoming a stand-up and being able to do that for a living all those years are the professional things that I'm proud of. And you know what? And also, and I'm sorry, maybe even more than any of that is my teaching. I have one student. I think I'm the only comedy teacher in America to have a student graduate to not only become a professional comedy writer. A lot of teachers have had students become professional comedy writer, but also the first student who won an Academy Award.
Who's that?
His name is Trevon Free. A great comic. He came to me. He was a stand-up comic. Took my writing for late night class. Immediately got a job on Colbert. Then on Samantha Bee. Worked in late night for years, nonstop. Wrote a short called Two Distant Strangers. I think it was for HBO, and he won an Academy Award for Best Short.
Well, there you go. So now do you only teach in person, or do you teach Zoom?
All Zoom. I would teach in person if they were in LA and they'd prefer to do it that way, but it's just worked out for everyone to do it over Zoom. So they can either, if people are interested, they can go through flapperscomedy.com and sign up for my group class, which is good because it's like a writer's room. The first week I sort of lay out how to do this for a couple of hours. And then every week I go over everybody's homework and we bring it to class and we bounce jokes back and forth. I've already spent the whole week tweaking jokes and making notes on it, which is something I wasn't able to do when I taught live. Over Zoom, I now take the week to go to give notes. So they're getting a lot for their money. Yeah.
So that's through Flappers?
That's through Flappers Comedy. Yeah. Flappers Comedy Club.
How else can people get in touch with you, Gabe?
They can get in touch with me over email, which would be Gabe, Gabe Abelson, Abelson @gmail.com. Or they can look up Gabe Abelson, Abelson on Facebook. Hit me up there. Instagram, hit me up there. TikTok, wherever you want.
All right, so people, please reach out to Gabe. If you want to write, reach out to him. I've known him forever, and he's a great writer. And he forgets that bit about doing the butt hey of Lewis and Seinfeld, but that's all right. That's all right. I still remember that bit. I'm going to call Joe Matarese later. Also, people, if you want to see comedy, Thursday, May 15th, my new show, Steve Cooper presents Laughter at the Lanes down there at the Splits Luxury Lounge at Laurel Lanes on Route 73 in Maple Shade. It's myself hosting with Tim Grill and Mark Riccadonna on May 28th at Soundplex, Comedy Corks and Connections. It's me and Chris Kosha. And then on my other brand new show on May 29th, it's a Thursday night at Death on the Fox Brewing Company. It's a killer lineup. It's me hosting with Bill Chang and Jay Black, one of his only area appearances for the next 6 months. Also, you can go to coopertalk.net, my other podcast. I have over 1,040 episodes. This is no lie, I interviewed Robin Campbell, one of the founding members of UB40, and he drank a glass of red wine when we were doing an interview, which I thought was very funny because he held up when I was talking about red wine. Also on YouTube, you can find out past episodes of Coop's Comedy Corner. Go find the Coop Kind. That's my weekly business podcast. I have a roundtable with 3 local professionals. We talk about networking, motivation, and all things like that. And don't forget to check out Jimmy Corhan, my producer. Thank you, Jimmy, so much for producing this show and all episodes of the Coop's Comedy Corner. You can find Jimmy at Comedy Trainwreck. He's got a bunch of great shows. The Legendary Wid, Counterculture, Cancel Culture with John Kensel, Talking Shit with Coleman Green, Ed McGrongle. He's got a whole bunch of great shows. So please check them out and email me if you want. Cooper at coopertalk.net. Anyway, you all have a great night. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.
Coop's Comedy Corner.